are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. And yourself?
Yeah, all very well. Thank you. And thanks very much for taking out your valuable time
Oh, a
to
pleasure.
come and help us
Always
out with
glad to
this
help.
important topic. And our audience is very much forward to hearing from you on
Okay.
today's topic, the criminalization of seafarers. And sadly, this topic is very, very close to each and every seafarer out at sea. And sometimes they have to undergo pressures and they have to go under undue stress because they have been, unnecessary. They have been put behind bars, or they have been, have to go through a lot of legal processes involved in that. So I'm sure that today they will get some opportunity to learn and get a bit more aware about the various issues around this, criminalization issues, and what the industry is doing, what the governments are doing, what ILO and IMO have taken steps to a bit more learn about it. But today, before we start, I just want to give a brief introduction about yourself to our audience. So, Mr. Charles Boyle have been, associated with the Nautilus International Union since he's been a director of the legal services since the year 2007. He's a LLM graduate, and as well as he's done his master's in law degrees in various institutes and organizations. He's also been involved a lot with the ILO, including with the European Union, as well as with the UK around MLC and its related issues. Mr. Boyle has been an author of the Maritime Labour Convention 2006, UK, and REG implementation. So we have a very renowned person today amongst us, and I'm sure that we are very lucky to have him today. And I understand that he has a very, very busy schedule in taking care of a lot of these MLC related issues, and he represents UK and also the tripartite committee been set up by the ILO on MLC and other labor matters. So welcome, Mr. Boyle, to this session, and I really value your support to ISWAN as well. And thank you very much for coming in today.
Okay, thank you, Chirag, and thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm very happy to join this broadcast today.
Thank you so much, Charles. I'll just stick to, because we have a limitation of time, and I'll just crack on with the questions, a few questions that we have tried to gather. But I request our audience to please put up some questions if they have in the chat box. We will take them up if the time permits towards the end of the session, and we will get back to you with the answers about that. So please add your questions in the chat box, guys. So my first question is just for starting with the basic thing. What is the term criminalization of seafarers mean? And can you provide us some examples of how such incidents in the past have affected the crew and the seafarers on board ship, and when they had no control over such incidents?
Yeah, the term criminalisation of seafarers, my view, has come to mean not just charging seafarers with criminal offences when they are merited, but through a culture developing of looking to find seafarers as scapegoats, someone to blame. So in other words, a culture of blaming seafarers whenever something goes wrong on a ship or at sea, whether the seafarer is at fault or not. So this is the worrying issue. I mean, ever since I've been at Nautilus, which is 15 years now, we've been fighting and promoting this campaign against the criminalisation of seafarers. So in other words, this is what it means. Looking for someone to blame after an incident. Now, you asked for some examples of where where seafarers have been criminalised through matters beyond their control. I can give 3 examples briefly. At least 2 of them are very well known, which are the first 2 that I'll mention. One is the Prestige, where Captain Mongores took a tanker to sea, and this ship was in a bad condition. There were very, very stormy seas off the coast of Spain and Portugal. Now, the coast states refused to give him permission to bring his ship in to a place of safety. As a result, the ship ended up breaking up, and huge amounts of oil were discharged into the sea. So he was arrested and eventually prosecuted and did some time in jail as a result. The other famous case is the Hebe Spirit. This one happened in South Korea, where the ship was actually at berth in a port, and it was a passing crane barge being towed past the ship that damaged the ship, resulting in, again, huge amounts of oil being discharged into the water. And the chief engineer and the captain ended up being jailed as a result of that one as well. Now, there was one that happened in 2018, an incident. This one was actually a Nautilus member, so Nautilus involved in this one. One of our members was the captain of a ferry that travelled between the UK mainland and the Isle of Wight in the area of the sea that we know as the Solent. And the ferry was actually struck, it was actually struck by a pleasure vessel. So a pleasure vessel crossed the course of the ferry without doing proper checks. Basically our captain was charged with offences, I think under the call regs, not keeping a proper lookout, and that matter was held in a court in Southampton, and he was found not guilty because the judge or the magistrate found that it was the fault of, well, in other words, it wasn't the fault of the master. It was effectively the fault of the navigator of the pleasure vessel who had basically crossed his path without making proper checks. Now, that could have been a case where the prosecution authority could have taken the view that, oh, we also think that there's an arguable case here that this is the fault of the vessel. Let's not charge them. However, he was still charged and had to face months of a worrying time waiting for the hearing coming up, and all the worry of the hearing. Lots of bad press in local newspapers as well, who basically wrote about him as if he was a bad captain, almost as if he was guilty until proven innocent, rather than the presumption of innocence applying, which is that, generally speaking, in most jurisdictions, people are innocent until they're proven guilty. Now, he was acquitted. That means found not guilty on those charges, and he walked free. Okay. So those are three examples of fairly recent cases, all within the last 20 years. The most recent one was 2018.
I think some of them definitely we have been heard it, and they have become a landmark issues across, and there was a lot of hue and cry, which also led to I think the government's releasing the seafarers afterwards, and we saw, especially around, I remember in the Hebe Spirit, there was a lot of agitations in India as well against the company, basically the Samsung Industries, about how they have been, criminalized the seafarers on them. And I personally had the opportunity to meet the master at a later date once he was home. So yeah, so I can definitely feel for that. It's how the seafarers, they have been treated is extremely, it's definitely not a good practice that how the seafarers should be treated on that. So so we just take the discussion a little bit forward and just look into that. What steps do you think that the flag states, because ultimately they are the ones who are responsible for the overall safety of the vessels and its crew. So how does the flag states or the national governments, what steps they have taken to protect the rights of the seafarers and who have been involved in such kind of incidents? And are there any international laws or conventions that address such issues?
Okay, I think the starting point is the joint IMO-ILO guidelines on fair treatment of seafarers when they've been involved in a maritime incident. Now, a maritime incident under those guidelines is incidents like collisions, pollutions, that sort of thing, call reg issues. So these are guidelines, and they set out the steps which the flag state, the port state, the seafarer's home state, and the ship owner can all take to help the seafarer in these situations. So they require cooperation between these parties to help the seafarer. The flag state's particularly important because the flag state has decided to take on board a ship and register it with itself. So it has an obligation to make sure that the ship is in a safe condition, and that it complies with all international conventions and domestic legislation of the flag state, and that everything is going in order, on that ship. And certainly on the owner to help seafarers when they've been caught up in maritime incidents and perhaps arrested in a foreign country. Now, the port state also has obligations under those guidelines. And, it's encouraging also to see that the IMO are also, the ILO are also developing a new set of guidelines, which are basically they will be based on these 2006 fair treatment guidelines for maritime incidents. But these new guidelines will be wider in their application, because they will deal with when seafarers are caught up in maritime crimes that are not maritime incidents. So, for instance, if a seafarer was arrested in a foreign port, perhaps relating to drug-related issues, perhaps accused of smuggling drugs, and this has also been in the past a ripe area for criminalising seafarers when basically contraband goods are found on board the ship. The first thing they do is arrest the master, even if the master had no idea what was in the containers that he was carrying. He can't possibly know what's in every container or in every bit of cargo. But these new guidelines will cover what there is in terms of a gap at the moment, because the 2006 guidelines will deal with maritime incidents. These new guidelines will deal with maritime crimes. So hopefully there should be full coverage in the sort of incidents that seafarers are likely to get involved in the course arc. Now, the legal committee of the IMO recently considered started working on these new guidelines, and the draft is still being considered. And we look forward to the finalised draft in due course. Of course, we shouldn't forget about the fair treatment steps in these instruments in terms of the 2006 guidelines. They outline seafarers' right to have a lawyer, the right to have an interpreter, the right not to be detained in a state if it's not necessary. So, for instance, to be released on bail, even if there's criminal charges hanging over them, on the basis that they come back at some point. The right not to incriminate themselves, even although the guidelines do state that seafarers should cooperate with authorities, but only to the extent where they don't waive their legal rights. So, in other words, they should not self-incriminate themselves. They should make sure that if they're going to be have official interviews under caution by any enforcement authorities, that they absolutely have a lawyer there present to help them.
Absolutely. No, we definitely look forward to these new guidelines. Yeah.
The problem with the current guidelines is that Seafarers' Right International carried out research a few years ago, and because they're guidelines, it means they're not mandatory. They're obviously aspirational. And it was found that the research that SRI carried out was to find out the extent to which they've been implemented within national legal systems. And now they found that some flag states had implemented them within the legal system. Some were in the course of doing so, or had partially done so. And some states had not done anything at all to bring them inside their national legal system. And I think the IMO was considering giving them some technical support to those states to help to get them, within the national legal systems. But a lot of these guidelines, it's not rocket science, it's basic concepts of fairness that make up general principles of criminal law and fair procedure.
Absolutely. And that leads to me the next question around, what are some of the challenges that the seafarers face when they defend themselves against these charges? Okay, when these charges are framed against them, what are the challenges that necessarily they face? And I understand the sources you mentioned just now is about this fair treatment of seafarers, that guidance book. But are there any other thing that they can refer to, or what are the steps that they should be taking at that time?
Okay, first of all, some of the difficulties they face is that they're usually going to be in a foreign country, away from home, in a different culture, surrounded by people who probably speak a different language. They're going to be completely unfamiliar with the local legal system. They might even feel under pressure to perhaps make admissions, perhaps on a false promise that they'll be released. You know, they'll be in a situation where they'll almost do anything that they think might get them home quicker. So they're at a real disadvantage. It's not like they can just remain at home awaiting trial. You know, they're in a foreign country, they're separated from their families and loved ones. So, you know, in terms of what they can do to try and help themselves, I think one of the obvious steps for seafarers is to join a trade union, because trade unions will do a lot for their members if they're involved in maritime crimes or maritime incidents. So I work for Nautilus International. As a union, we provide legal support to our members who've been involved in maritime incidents. Now, we've also set up an organisation called the Nautilus Federation. Now, this is a group of trade unions throughout the world. There's, you know, New Zealand, Sweden, Denmark, all over the place. And we've set up a system of reciprocal help, which we will offer to each other's members through the Nautilus Federation. And one of those systems is called the Joint Assistance and Support Network. And I'd advise any of your listeners, we call that JASON for short, by the way, advise any of your listeners to visit that website and look at sources, and they'll see how this system is set up. And that basically means, like, for instance, if one of the Singapore's unions has a member who gets into trouble in England, in Southampton, they can contact me in England and I will help their member in Southampton, and vice versa. So you see, it's a reciprocal system, and it works very well, you know, to help combat criminalisation. We also give advice on the fair treatment guidelines. We also, through ISWAN actually, carry a Nautilus 24/7 helpline for Nautilus members, and members who are in trouble are able to call that helpline, and ISWAN will refer those calls with a detailed message to us if they get involved in maritime incidents. So my view is that you know, there's certainly more room for international cooperation between unions and like-minded organisations. You know, we need seafarers to be able to be sure of accessing consular officials if they're arrested. Right. Now, under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, 1963, you know, for the ratifying countries that apply, you know, anyone who's arrested there has a right to access their consular authority within the country, lays on their behalf back with, you know, family back home, etc. So there's lots of things happening. There's lots of things already there. I think a lot of it is about awareness, really, how to make seafarers aware of the buttons to push when they get into trouble.
Right. And very, very correctly mentioned about that. Our seafarers are not much aware of these things, which I've felt over the period of time while interacting with them in different institutes. They have no idea what to be done. And, you know, and sometimes they don't see the benefits of joining a union, you know, because they feel that, you know, why should I pay the yearly fees for the union, and I'm working in a good company. But we always tell them that, you know, they should have a membership with the union. I think we have repeated that in our discussions with different unions who have come up across. You know, we have ITF affiliate union in India who came and spoke about some other topics. And we also had ITF coming in one of the sessions and also speaking about the benefits of membership of a union. So through this platform, I again appeal to the seafarers to please consider taking the membership of a ITF affiliate union and try to continue your membership till the time you are at sea. That will, you know, give you a benefit that in case you need any support, a legal support especially, you have a union to guide you better in that troublesome time, or to your family. But you can also ring in ISWAN 24/7 helpline, who can also guide you a bit and take care of the things when any crisis happens in your life. So I just move forward to that discussion, Charles. And we see that in your opinion, what role do ship owners and operators have in preventing such incidents to actually happen? And how can that ensure that the seafarers are not unfairly blamed or penalized in these incidents?
Okay, a couple of issues there. I think the first thing is, so many of these issues arise out of technical failures on board ships, whether it leads to a pollution incident or a collision. So the first thing that ship owners must do is make sure that their ships are safe, seaworthy, safe to go to sea, regular checks and planned maintenance is carried out, all the equipment is working properly. I think ship owners need to own up, I think, when they think they're to blame, and not blame their own employees. I mean, we do get some incidents where when an incident happens, there comes a point sometimes when the ship owner has to distance themselves, or at least they say they have to distance themselves from the master or the chief engineer, because they're now saying, actually, our defence is quite different from the master's defence. We're effectively saying we're not to blame. We think this is human error by the master or the chief engineer. And effectively you end up in a blame game where, neither the crew nor the ship owner are singing from the same hymn sheet any longer. It's one part. So I think that ship owners need to step up to the plate and take responsibility when things go wrong. And they need to be more willing to fund the legal defence of their employees when they're charged with a maritime incident, because we get cases where, the union's paying for the legal defence when really a ship owner could pay. Why doesn't the ship owner always, make sure that the P&I club is going to pick up the tab for the crew member? That sometimes happens that they do. The better ship owners do support their crew members, but some don't. We get mixed results there.
Absolutely. I think it's the responsibility of the ship owners to also look after the seafarers during their difficult times. And I always feel that the ship owners, majority of the ship owners have been taking care of the seafarers very, very well, in fact. But unfortunately, there are few ship owners who have been taking good care of the people, and that's how the whole problem arises. And I think that's one of the things that seafarers needs to be aware of about as well, prior to joining the vessels, to do a proper research as well. So anything on that, Charles, that you would like to add about, what all things they can get into the awareness mode when they select their shipping company?
Yeah, I mean, I think turning to the issue of welfare, basically, even, if we get away from talking about the legal issues for the moment, but what touched on it already, but what is so important is if it's arrested, that their welfare is also looked after, and the ship owner can help there. The ship owner can be in touch with the detaining state to inquire about the welfare of the seafarers, make sure visits are carried out, make sure that provisions are provided, and make sure that seafarer continues to be paid. I mean, this is one gap in the MLC. There's nothing in the MLC that states that a seafarer cannot be sacked after a maritime incident. This has happened. I'm aware of one case where it's happened, where the seafarer was almost immediately dismissed soon after the maritime incident, and then held in custody, but not paid. Now, we know the MLC provides for payments while seafarers are held hostage by pirates. Why doesn't the MLC get amended to state that if a seafarer is arrested due to a maritime incident, they must remain in the ship owner's employment during the period of detention and be paid accordingly? You can just imagine if that's not happening, it just piles the worry on the seafarer, perhaps makes them vulnerable to almost pleading guilty or doing anything to get out of the situation as fast as possible. So really, ship owners, they could have contractual, you asked what more ship owners could do. They could be entering into collective bargaining agreements with unions where there's a term in the collective bargaining agreement where the ship owner takes up a legal obligation to look after, well, you could almost refer to the fair treatment guidelines in the CBA. You could put specific obligations, like the obligation to fund legal defence, the obligation to provide, welfare and pastoral support if a seafarer is detained. There is so much can be done, and unions can do a lot of this by basically including a lot of this in collective bargaining agreements.
Definitely, totally agree on that. I think that's something important that I think the ship owners should be taking care of that. And I'm sure that they have been doing that, but I think that is something which I think the seafarers also can look into the CBAs that they are going to sign, the contracts that they're going to sign. Please go through your contracts wisely, and please go through the which CBAs your contract is following. So I think those are some of the things that you need to keep a look of that before signing any contracts. I understand there are a few questions as well in the chat box, but if before I try to end up this thing, I think this was quite a useful session to understand different things, which how the seafarers have been criminalized in the past, and I understand there have been few recent cases as well. Especially people are talking a bit more about Heroic Iden vessel, which we have heard about that the vessel has been now. Almost the crew have been going to be released very soon. I don't want to complicate the things for them, but I think that's something which I think we have seen in our chat box also. People are asking about the Heroic Iden, how the seafarers were treated, and it went on. If you want to add anything on that particular incident, anything, otherwise you may refrain from saying anything at this stage. Yeah.
You broke up when you mentioned the name of the incident. Which one was it?
Yeah, this was Heroic Iden vessel, which was there in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So where the vessel was has been arrested.
Yeah. I think I did hear some stuff about this, possibly at the IMO legal committee this year. But I've certainly, I've seen some references to it in the press, but unfortunately, it's not one I know a huge deal about because it doesn't involve our members. That's not a good reason why I shouldn't know more about it. But on this specific case, I don't know too much about that one.
No, that's perfectly fine. I think that's because that's one of the questions in the chat box which I picked up, and I thought I'll just try and see. But there's no worry. I think because we are still waiting for the seafarers to come back, and I don't think so. We should do any kind of damages by talking about that. But then there are a few. I think we have a researcher who has asked some questions, and the person has mentioned that she is a PhD student in the UK studying this particular topic, and she would actually be looking at that what practical support is available for the seafarers through the network of lawyers from the union. So that's something which she would like to understand.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. There is a Nautilus International app where we have basically a list of lawyers. So I think that she would be welcome to download that. I think it can be downloaded by anyone, whether they're a Nautilus member or not. So she could try downloading the Nautilus International app. Also have a look at our Nautilus Federation website. Like if she wants to have a look at what sources are available, look at Nautilus Federation, look at sources, and she'll see stuff there on Joint Assistance and Support Network, JASON, which I mentioned earlier. And we've actually produced guidance on the fair treatment guidelines and also a checklist for fair treatment as well. And we explain how that links in with Nautilus 24/7, across the Nautilus Federation. She could also have a look at Seafarers Rights International, is an excellent source, their website, source for relevant issues.
Absolutely.
And Seafarers Rights International, they also developed a lawyer's charter. So basically, SRI basically got various international law firms to sign up to a lawyer's charter or a seafarer's charter, where basically they agree that they will act totally in the interest of the seafarer. So that might be a helpful source as well for that student.
Yeah. And there's another one, like person, Maritime Universe. They're a bit emotional, and then they're saying that the guidelines are not good enough, and we need to have stricter punishments for such ship owners who do not follow the right procedures in place. So any comments on that? Are there something that which are going to come, something in MLC or in anywhere else? Do you see that any particular state looking forward to have those kind of things in their ratifications of the local laws?
I mean, I think the issue at the moment is that the guidelines themselves are non-mandatory. However, if there's a breach of the guidelines, my first step would be to say, well, I wonder, despite the status of the guidelines themselves, has this been enshrined within the port states? Because that will usually be the state the attention is on, where the detained seafarer will be, the coastal port state. Have a look at their local laws, consult a local lawyer there to ask, what in the fair treatment guidelines is actually mandatory in this country. For instance, in the UK, if it's mandatory that if someone's going to be interviewed under caution, it's absolutely mandatory that they have access to a lawyer. That's not because the guidelines say so. This predates the guidelines. It's considered to be almost a universal right. I would expect the right to have a lawyer if interviewed by authorities. Focus on what is mandatory within the coast state, and get as much support behind you as possible, or behind the seafarer. Again, we go back to union, even good ship owners, perhaps explore the legal aid system within the country of detention. What sort of legal support would a country provide to a visiting citizen who's not a resident of that country? There'll usually be a traveling seafarer who just happens to be detained there. So again, you're probably going to get mixed results, looking at different countries throughout the world.
Yeah. So one of the audience member has also suggested that the contractual obligations and legal understanding should be part of the college course, and I think that's definitely that more and more awareness needs to be done. And I just tell you that I am presently working with the Indian Maritime University on looking after some of these legal aspects as well. I'm not a legal lawyer, but we are trying to look into the human side angle and the legal side angle. They will be coming in. So we're trying to come together and do something. So yeah, so that's something which we are looking forward to have that happen. So I think that's important that our CPS gets a bit more aware in their colleges itself about what are their obligations and all that. And just one more question, which I think the last one for the day. In fact, I know it's been running out of time. But just since you've been here, Charles, the seafarers who have been freed now, and they have been discharged of all the allegations what they have been put into, and the charges what they have been put into, then they would need a lot of rehabilitation, perhaps once they go home. Sometimes in the tenure of their jail period, or their when they are in this kind of situation, could be from few weeks to months, or maybe some years as well, because we have handled a few cases when the seafarers were in prison for 3 or 4 years, and once they come back home, they are left on their own, because firstly, because in such cases the ship owners have always severed their ties. The unions have fought it out to get them home, and it took a lot of time to get home. But once they are at home, it is very difficult for them to then rehabilitate and all that. So are there any programs been run through the unions to rehabilitate such seafarers, or do you anticipate anything coming up very soon on that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything specific, but I can certainly think of things that would be desirable. I remember in one case we had, this wasn't a criminalisation issue, but one of our members was kidnapped by pirates. And when he eventually got home to his home country, we arranged for him to have access to counselling. So certainly, I could see scope for the MLC to be amended, for instance, that that says, like, whenever seafarers have been involved in a maritime issue and return home, there should be welfare support and counselling and well-being provided by parties like the employer, ship owner, recruitment agency, or the home country. Because the MLC often puts obligations on the seafarer's home country, whether or not that's got any connections with his employment. And also, it'd be nice to see this side of the MLC to be beefed up. Perhaps even a reference to the fair treatment guidelines to be built into the MLC, and try and put on those guidelines on a stronger footing. But certainly, one could see that there must be scope for various sources of support to be provided to seafarers from various parties. Especially from the ship owner, I think, when they get home.
Charles, there are no ends to the question. There are a few more, but I don't want to keep you holding for that. But are you okay that if somebody has more questions, they can write to you at your email, and we can share your mail ID with them?
Yeah. They can write into the Instagram account. Is that okay? Or give them my email address. But obviously, I won't be able to reply straight away because I'm so busy. But it'd be best to do it on the Instagram account rather than the Nautilus account, if that's all right. Just to, they'll already have access to the Instagram account. So let them do it on the Instagram account rather than the Nautilus account, and I'll try and get back to them at some point. But,
Okay. I hope everybody has heard it correctly, that you can write to Charles in the Instagram and he will get back to you with the answers of you. And sorry, we are running short of time and we could not take on more questions. But I think it was a very lively session. We have a lot of interactions today. So thank you very much, Charles, for taking out your time and giving us your valuable guidance on this particular topic. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Chirag, and I'm always happy to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and have a lovely weekend. And thank you to all our listeners and audience today as well.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for the audience joining and their interest shown, and I wish everyone a lovely weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Take
Thank
care.
You.
All the very
Bye-bye.
best. Bye. Thank you, everyone.